Welcome everyone, and thanks for joining Pet Food Forum Connect. I am Paola Cane, and it's a pleasure for me today to talk with you about the many faces of the crisis. Nowadays, companies are facing a huge number of crises, often consisting in new threats. If some decades ago, we used to consider a crisis a once-in-a-lifetime event, nowadays, crises are increasing their frequency for many different reasons. The speed of the modern world has forced many companies to accelerate business processes beyond traditional limits. Sometimes competitive pressure forces firms to rush offering good enough products opposed to perfect ones, and quality issues may arise. The same situation is often likely to happen when we select our suppliers. Moreover, globalization and long supply chains expose us to huge threats that cannot be always foreseen or controlled. So, long before COVID-19 spread, the business environment has become volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. Because of all of these factors, any decision we take today as pet food leaders can produce a huge number of unintended consequences that can rapidly spread into a crisis. The good news is that today we can be better prepared to cope with future crises, and we have some very good tools to avoid the most common mistakes or even the most fatal ones. Today, first of all, we will analyze the very different phases of the crisis. Then we will spot some do's and don'ts that might be useful when coping with a crisis. It's going to be a dense speech, so let's get started. We all have a fresh and vivid idea on what a crisis is. Nevertheless, I wish to start by the very definition of crisis, which is a sudden, unplanned, and negative event that can significantly alter normal business and compromise the safety of your company, of your employees, of your customers and markets. And that requires a sudden decision to be taken. Crises can have many phases: pandemics, ethical transgressions, facility problems, info leak, product tampering, environmental disasters, or even a non-conformity that will lead to a product recall. Whatever the form it takes, it can compromise the safety of your company, of your employees, and of your markets. Even if not as much as dramatic as a pandemic, all the situations have much more in common. Customers will raise questions, clients will cancel orders, investors get anxious, employees will lose jobs, competitors will sense opportunity, and authorities will come knocking. There are many classifications of crisis types. A very good reference to start with is the book by Gerald Mayers, When He Hits the Fan, The 9 Kinds of Crises for Business. Unfortunately, this book is a little bit outdated, and the business environment at that time it was written was very different from today's one. So, in my opinion, Mayer's 9 crisis types must be completed, at least with other 3 types. Let's give a look to them and to my additions. In the meanwhile, I invite you to think about which of the many phases of crisis can threaten your team, your unit, or your organization. It's a good exercise to do. Starting from the classic Mayer's 9 crisis types, we can find 1. Public perception crisis. It must be said that almost all the crises have some impact on company reputation and consumers' trust. But some crises are driven almost entirely by changes in public perceptions. Product failure. When products are found to be defective, or even worse, dangerous to at least one part of your customer base, a crisis will occur. Whether they are exploding batteries, unlabeled allergens in food, beetles in infant formulas, or melamine in pet food, this kind of event can significantly alter your business. 3. Market shift. Crises can arise from major changes in the market. Let's think, for example, about the epic failure of Kodak that missed the opportunity to turn in digital photography, a technology that ironically it invented in 1975 by producing the first digital camera. 4. Cash shortage. No need to say that when access to money becomes limited, a crisis almost certainly will follow. Management change. There are many examples of major crises as a result of change in management, even when it was all about generational turnover. Ensuring a turnover of business and management has to be handled strategically. If not, it can be really critical. 6. Merger and hostile takeover. When two companies come together, we all know that the outcomes are rarely positive for all the parts involved. 6. Regulation and deregulation. When rules of the game change following reforms, this often has significant consequences. Personally speaking, this is a comfort zone to me, as I have spent a lot of time dealing with disruptive changes in pet food regulation and pet food labeling. This is a kind of situation that might be very critical if not ended on time. 8. Human resources. When relationship between management and labor becomes strained, it is difficult for the whole company to function effectively. Some strikes can even turn to significant disruptions even in multiple other sectors. Let's think about railways strikes or port strikes. 9. International events. When the global environment changes for any reason, the interests of an organization that depend on international trade are threatened. Climate change and wars are the perfect example. But also events such as the Brexit vote need to be handled as a potential threat to your company. To these first 9 crisis types, I wish to add at least 3 other crisis types. The first is the environmental crisis. Public concerns about the environment has been growing in recent years. Consumers today are very attentive to environmental information that can help them maintain and take their shopping decisions. With this increasing interest, you need to be prepared in case an environmental issue involves your business. Natural disasters. The impact of earthquakes, hurricanes, tsunamis, or any other natural disaster can be devastating to an area, to its people, and to its economy. Damage can linger for years. At last, but not at least, health crisis. Health crises, such as COVID-19, as we all know, are going to exert a global impact on the international business environment. But why so many threats? Today's business environment is complex. The globalization of trade and supply chain, the intensification of competition, the acceleration of business processes, and even the fact that our customers are really more demanding today are the perfect breeding ground for organizational crisis. That's why we describe today's business environment using the word VUCA that stays for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. The evolution of today's environment has increased our need for preparedness and requires the ability to resolve issues as soon as they emerge. To be truly effective leaders, we should be spending some time and energy considering what to do and what our teams and stakeholders need from us when a crisis happens. Our job when dealing with a crisis is not only to understand that a crisis is happening, but to be able to do something about it when it hits the fan. Among the many elements that can influence the extent and the impact of a crisis, some of them are really essentials. Based on my personal experience, the quintessential of crisis management is made by readiness, timeliness, lucidity, responsibility, and leadership. Now that we have a clearer frame of the many phases of the crisis, let's start our list of do's and don'ts in order to cope with any crisis. First of all, the first thing to do is planning. Careful preparation is a key step to any crisis management process. Getting ready is extremely important in any occasion, and it's even more so in times of crisis. Nevertheless, there is a great distinction between having a plan and planning, because when you are planning for an emergency, you have to start by this very first thing. The very definition of emergency, that is that it is unexpected. Therefore, it's not willing to happen exactly as you imagine it. So, even if you have a great crisis management plan, you should not rely too much on it. It is not a step-by-step guide. A crisis management plan could be an effective tool for many reasons and can help you to manage certain aspects and save time. It will help you and your team to gain confidence with protocols, acquire the right automatism, and to learn how to act coordinately. But again, a crisis management plan shall not be crafted nor considered as a step-by-step guide. Think of your plan as a reference tool, and keep in mind that having a plan is not enough. Please read your plan in advance and not after the crisis hit. Update your plan at least once a year. Test your plan with specific simulation and constantly adapt to your company's growth and changes. Let's now proceed with our list of do's and don'ts with the second one. To respond promptly is really something that has to be done. At the opposite, the wait and see approach is often the wrong approach, one of the most dangerous enemies of good crisis management and crisis recovery. There are many reasons, rational reasons for late response to crisis, and I'm sure that you have experienced some of them during the COVID-19 spread. These reasons may include the risk of being accused of being overreacting, the reluctance to impose restrictions that may interfere with business opportunities and efficiency, and concerns about losing business opportunities. It goes without saying that decisions at the very beginning of a crisis cannot be taken lightheartedly. But in any way, the wait-and-see approach has been the go-to crisis method for a lot of professionals in the past decades. In my personal experience, crises never solve themselves alone, and nothing magical happens to any client thanks to the wait-and-see approach. Speed is a crucial element in dealing with crisis scenarios. Fast must be the collection of data and the updating of data. Fast must be the transmission of the information flow, the decision taken, and the corrective actions that follow. The first hours of any crisis, the so-called golden hours, are the most delicate moments where most of the organizations fail, mostly because they underestimate the risks, or even they do not recognize they are into a crisis. What do you do in the first hours often determines whether the event remains manageable and under control or erupts into a massive crisis. So, please do not waste time. It is often said that crises require urgent decision to be taken. And this is true. Taking urgent decision is essential even when some of them might be based on few or partial information. At the opposite, we shall avoid to take poor or no decisions. In condition of absolute emergency, there is no time to plan. We just have time to act. However, it is necessary to avoid the risk of making hasty decisions based on incomplete or inaccurate information on which, on the contrary, long-term effect may depend. Let's come to another point of our list that is very frequent to spot in many companies: panic. Crises require a good dose of self-control, and moreover, they require the ability to exert control over the situation in order to take proper actions and reduce negative consequences. Maintaining control under severe time and psychological pressure is not easy. It's both extraordinary, rare, and difficult. I know it. At the opposite, I strongly recommend: do not panic. It may seem trivial, but a lucid and clear vision of the threat, of the risks we are running, and their consequences is fundamental in order to handle any emergency. But how to maintain control? Maintaining control doesn't mean displaying an inviolate belief in yourself, and nor not being scared. Maintaining controls means the ability to stay focused on the objective, on protecting staff, space and system, and reputation, and ensuring continuity to the operations. A company leader during a crisis is not asked to be fearless, nor perfect. Up to a point, anxiety, fear, and stress are human emotional reactions that can be considered absolutely normal. They are not a sign of weakness until they take the upper hand. Always keep in mind that our job as leader is finding solutions and not to look for someone to blame. When trying to determine responsibilities for mistakes, it is good to remember that the witch hunting mentality is often deleterious. In the middle of an emergency, looking for the person to blame is never a good idea. On the contrary, it will lead those responsible to hide information necessary for decision-making in an attempt to escape the pillory. The last of the do and don'ts today is ensure communication. Whether you have to communicate with your employees during a pandemic, for instance, in order to reassure them of the activity you have taken to protect their health, or you have to communicate with media after a recall, always keep the lines of communication open, as during a crisis, lack of or poor communication would be filled by speculations and uncertainty. During a crisis, stakeholders are anxious and they need to hear clear, compelling, and consistent communication. That's why your communication shall be precise, transparent, effective, and quick. Part of the communication may be admitting mistakes publicly. Admitting mistakes publicly can be very difficult, even painful, but is not a sign of weakness. At the contrary, in many circumstances, apologies and admitting mistakes can help rebuild the relationship with your stakeholders. At the opposite, public denial can be interpreted as arrogant or unreliable. At the opposite, public denial can be interpreted as arrogant. This is a quality that no company would like to be associated with. Never refuse to communicate. Never lose the opportunity to show your concerns and your commitment to your stakeholders. Now that we are almost at the end of our journey today together, I wish to leave you with another extra piece of advice. It's never too late to do the right thing. Avoid the most classical mistakes, successfully manage crises, and possibly be better managers, women and men. Thank you.